You got this and you got that, and you gonna murder this one and murder that one. Talking all that bullshit. I'm gonna put it to you like this, yo.
This is for the nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, you ain't gonna touch me, you not gonna do nothing, you are not above me. I bet you wish you was me, I know it, I know.
What is poppin', everybody? And welcome back to another special episode of the Only Friends podcast. Well, you know, it's me and my only friends, which includes, but it's not limited to, my boy Hunt. What's poppin', baby? How you feeling today?
Hey, Con, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm chill, you know, another day in the life.
Feeling very GTO in my GTO Wizard swag.
Oh, God, I love this swag. This hat's very comfortable, man.
Yeah, we just got a whole big bag of swag, and now we're all wearing another company's stuff.
Hunt, what does swag stand for?
I don't know. You tell me.
Did we teach you nothing?
You did just tell me, but I've forgotten it, so I just threw it straight back to you.
Stuff we all get.
Yeah.
Ah, that's the one.
Like this hoodie, like this hat.
I knew it was stuff something. I would have just said stuff.
What's poppin', Burke?
You look like The Weeknd.
No, I'm 7 days a week.
No,
we get it poppin' 7 days a week, not just on the weekend, bro.
You know, like the artist.
Oh,
you
that
look
guy.
like The Weeknd.
Do I?
In your hat.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe I can be a stunt double.
Do musicians need stunt doubles? I don't know.
Yeah, I could do a whole concert for them if I look like them.
Wow.
What do you mean? You don't even have to sing. They just fucking play the recording in the background.
That's actually true.
We could do this both sides of the world.
Lip sync stunt doubles. You've just created an incredible business idea.
Yeah, it's not even a question.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Man, imagine if you just didn't have to tour because you had somebody who looked like you.
You get famous, and then you just don't have to do anything from that point on.
You just pay Conrad like an hourly to go on tour for 200 days a year.
Fucking
You're
rich.
just chilling in Beverly
Just
Hills
have a whole
collecting
bunch of different
millions.
doubles that do all your concerts everywhere.
Man, incredible.
You'd be like who is it? It's Vladimir Putin of music. Like he has like 7 Vladimir
Right.
Putins that do all of his stuff all around Russia, and then he just chills at home because he's too afraid of getting assassinated.
Right.
Wait, that's really a thing? Why did
That's
Berkey
a
look at me like,
completely-
what happened?
Oh, nothing. Assassinated got thrown out there, and I thought maybe it was an option.
A lot of these world leaders from, well, especially like these third world countries, like Saddam Hussein he had tons of
He was an
body
easy man to look
impersonators.
like.
Was he?
I think so.
You just have
South
to be
Park replicated him pretty well.
You, just have to, you really have to cultivate that mustache for the Saddam Hussein look. You know.
I mean, the problem is Americans are dumb, so, like, it's not that...
You all right over there, Berg?
God damn, that bites.
It's not that it was easy to replicate him.
Whoa.
It's just everybody was just like, oh, you know?
I mean, it's much easier to replicate somebody or impersonate somebody when a bunch of people don't actually know what the guy looks like.
That's
You know,
true,
you
too.
could just tell the average American this is Saddam Hussein. They'd be like, okay.
Conrad, it's incredible that you just said that many words without saying anything.
I mean, I do it all the time.
Literally just like the only takeaway there was, and you know?
I do it all the time, like 7 days a
actually,
week.
no, we don't know.
I do it 7 days a week, man.
All right, let's get into a few things. First and foremost, everybody should be fired up about this.
Pirates?
No.
Damn it.
No, Brian.
Nobody at all.
Berkey never fired up last night.
Oh, look, you know, some things can just stay off air.
No.
The Pittsburgh will be getting the NFL draft in 2026.
Yes.
Who cares about that?
Everybody.
Why?
Because the draft is now the biggest party in the offseason for all of the NFL. And for anybody who is from Pittsburgh, you will understand that we absolutely have no capacity to handle 100,000 people driving in the city.
No,
It's going to be an absolute shit show.
for sure.
Where do you think they'll have it?
I don't know.
I don't know anything that could hold that amount of people. Heinz Field, maybe, but they're not going to have it in the stadium.
The convention center?
Convention Center's not holding. I mean, what's capacity? 20,000, maybe
I'm
15,000.
not exactly sure.
I mean, sure, it will be the convention center. It's gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah.
God bless to everybody who gets to go there. My fellow Yinzers.
I assume they thought this through before they
Well-
just said, "Hey, let's have it in Pittsburgh."
I don't know, man. I mean, I think Detroit was such a resounding success that they were probably like, let's go to another steel belt city and see what we can conjure up. But I don't know, man. I don't think we're ready for it. It'll be fun to watch on TV. I'm not going.
No chance you'd go?
I just started watching the draft this year. I think it's the dumbest thing.
I wouldn't even care about like the actual draft. I'd just go for like the party.
Oh, well, that sounds great for you.
Yeah.
For me, not so much.
Nah, that's true.
What party? I mean, it was here in Vegas. I didn't even consider going.
I have a question as a person who doesn't follow the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the case that like when you're in the NFL draft, you literally don't get to choose what team you go to?
Wait a second. You follow sports where you get to pick the team you go to?
There are no drafts in European sports.
How do you end up on a team?
Somebody says I'll pay you.
You start out at a youth academy when you're like 12.
Yeah.
And the team signs you to an amateur contract when you're like 16.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're a pro, they sign you to a pro contract when you're 18.
How does that keep things competitive and not just like the richest teams just being like the best and nobody else can compete?
In the long term, that is an issue, but that's because the European leagues have promotion and relegation. So theoretically, yes, the richest teams do succeed on a greater level, but you can start at the bottom and work your way up.
Yeah.
Like the team that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney own, Wrexham, they have moved up 2 divisions in the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, they're rich.
And the thing is that
Bob's team just moved up
there
too.
are regulations about how much money you can and can't spend.
Okay, so it's like a salary cap per se.
It's more of a spending cap, but yeah. So that we do have issues with competitive balance, but basically because of the geography of it all, and also because going back historically, the league didn't sort of start on an official date. It just kind of like morphed into existence over a period of decades. Yeah. There's no established process for having a draft. And there's no college sports.
So in general, people just play at the whatever region they're from.
Yeah, it's regionalized, but it's also, clubs will, it's in soccer at least, teams will really put energy into having recruitment in a lot of different areas. So they'll get players, the best, 12-year-old players that come up in their area, they're more likely to get those players.
Yeah, that's very similar to how college sports are here.
Absolutely.
That's a great parallel. American college athletics are basically on par with rest of world professional athletics.
Possibly. But the college athletic, the part of the reason why there is no draft is because there's no established college athletics across Europe. Like, it's not a big deal.
There's no
Nobody
NCAA.
gives a shit. There's no NCAA, yeah.
Right,
Nobody cares about universities playing each other at sports.
Sure, but for a lot of sports, college doesn't matter that much. For the longest time, the NBA would draft out of high school. Baseball drafts 14-year-old Puerto Rican kids.
Okay, I didn't know any of that. But yeah,
Football is the face of American sports, and that system is very unique to football, I would say. I would say basketball is kind of following suit in the one and dones now. But I actually think that they switched I think you're allowed to draft out of high school again coming up next year, maybe?
Next year, I believe
In the
it
NBA.
is.
In the NBA. And they're the game has changed so much. So much of the league is becoming European now. Where in the past it was sub 1%. Now it's 10% of the league.
Yeah. There's just an order of things, especially in football, where it's just you play high school and then you play college and then you play pro.
Yeah.
And there's almost nothing really in between. I mean, there are a few instances where you might play in an arena league or the Canadian league and then eventually make it to the NFL, but those cases are far in between. But as far as getting to choose where you play, eventually you do. So most sports, they have they get drafted, then they have a rookie contract that's a few years, and then eventually they go to free agency and then they can go on the market.
That, but at a certain point, I just find it wild that someone can come in at 21 and they just tell you, okay, you're going here.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Wild.
How big was Haralabob's team's move up? What league? Do you know about that?
I believe they are now from what I know, they're in the Spanish second division, which is it's pretty big. It's definitely a pretty significant thing for that team for sure. And if they were to, in the next few years, if they were to move up again, they would be playing the Spanish first division, which is probably definitely one of the top 3 leagues in the world.
Okay,
and
sick.
they would be playing Barcelona, Real Madrid, all these big teams twice a season. So Castellón getting promoted is definitely a really big deal.
That's pretty cool. I saw they also signed a 50-year lease agreement with the state Castellón.
That's wild.
That's gotta be pretty cool.
I didn't know that. But I think one of the other things about soccer compared to sports in this country is you actually can, because of the nature of the sport, you can be really young and play against grown adults and still do well.
That's baseball too.
Really? Like 16-year-olds?
Not-
could compete?
18-year-olds.
Right, but this is the thing. Like, there's
Tennis,
literally...
Tennis is another good
Oh,
example.
yeah, tennis is another good example, yeah. Except, obviously, it's not team sport, but, like, there's an example right now of there's at Barcelona in Spain, one of the best teams in the world. They had a guy, a Spanish guy who's like half Spanish, half Moroccan, named Lamine Yamal. He's 16. He's been a regular in their team the whole season. He started playing for one of the top teams in the world when he was 15. And he's this little skinny 15-year-old kid that is clearly not even fully grown, but he's so ridiculously good that he competes with adults in that league. And that, you know, if you had like a system where you had to like only start at a certain age or whatever, like it'd probably be much more difficult for that to actually happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of contact sports are kind of this way. You know, baseball, you'll see like 16-year-old, especially like foreign kids, they'll get signed and they'll end up in like low A ball, stuff like that.
I want to argue something. Soccer is not a non-contact sport.
Yeah, it is.
Technically, it's supposed to be, but yeah, it doesn't play as one.
It definitely does not.
Is it a foul to hit people?
Yes.
Okay, then it's a non-contact sport.
But-
Basketball also is a non-contact sport. Like, what are we talking about here?
Basketball is a non-contact sport.
Absolutely.
The gray area with soccer is that there are certain kinds of hitting people, like shoulder to shoulder,
bumps.
is completely legal.
Sure.
So it's non-contact in that you can't the contact isn't the point of the game, but there is a lot of contact during the course of a game. That's why I say it's like it is and it isn't.
Yeah, but it's just like it's not hockey and it's not football, which are
that's
full
definitely
contact.
true. But you can still you can still compete as a teenager against adults. You just have to be really fucking good. Like that's the thing about it.
What's the best case of like the young? When did Erling come up?
Haaland, he was definitely pretty well known as like one of the best young players when he was 16 or 17, playing in Norway. And he's a little bit of a special case because he's an absolute physical beast.
Yeah,
he's like
a monster.
he's like 6'5", 200 pounds. So like when he was 16, he was grown man size.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different. And then with players like Messi or Lamine Yamal, like they are smaller than average, but they have such an insane level of technical ability that they can get by even if they've got like big dudes pushing them around. They can just, you know, outskill everybody.
Pretty sick.
So it's, it really just depends on how good you are, really.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, kids are fast.
Kids are fast.
But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of teenagers that are competing at like a pro, semi-pro level. Pickleball is another sport where you could be as young as you want, as long as you can make cuts. Golf, there are a lot of kids that are shooting low enough to actually make PGA cuts, but I think that they have. I think you have to be a certain age to relinquish your amateur status, if I'm not mistaken. And then yeah, like tennis is another great example where the best player in the world right now, I think he's like 19 or 20.
Really? I thought it was. I'm way out of date on tennis. I thought it was still like Djokovic or someone.
Djokovic is basically 1 or 2 at any given time, but it's the. Is he a Greek kid? I think his name starts with M. Huh?
Wait, you said who's number?
Say Nadal?
Yeah, you said who's number 1 or 2?
Yeah.
Tennis.
It's Nadal Djokovic.
Yeah.
Wait,
Isn't
Rafael Nadal,
Didn't
right?
he retire or
Nadal
something?
retired like a decade ago.
Yeah, Nadal has been playing
Not
for
a
little bit.
decade, but like
Long
a
enough
while.
ago that he's not
Yeah.
a part of this conversation.
Who's number 1?
It's this.
There's a kid called Alcaraz, isn't there? Like
yeah,
Alcaraz.
Carlos.
Sorry.
is that him?
Yeah, sorry, the
That's him?
Spanish kid.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was that young.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's 19 or 20, and there's another kid from Greek that I can't remember his name. He's in the top 5 as well.
That's wild.
What the hell's the Netflix series that's out? So there's 2. There's one for golf. It's called Full Swing. That's actually really great. But it's mainly like the trials and tribulations between LIV and the PGA,
Right.
and like how they're all at odds with one another. And then there's another one that follows tennis. It just finished its 2nd season, which was this past tennis season, so it's going into its 3rd. Alcaraz may be older now because I'm basing it off of having watched.
So
I don't really follow tennis that closely.
Alcaraz is 21. Jannik
yeah.
Skinner, who's number 2 in the world, is 22, and Alexander Zverev is 27, who's number 4.
But like Alcaraz has been, debatably in the top 3 for like the last 3 seasons. So he was like 19 when he broke in, 18 maybe.
I think he won the major at like 19 2 years ago.
He's won a bunch of majors, like a part of the Grand Slams or whatever. Him and Jesus Christ, the name's escaping me. The older guy. Come on, help me. You just said it.
Djokovic?
Djokovic, yeah. They've played like a bunch of slam finals.
Yeah.
And like depending on court, they're basically like pretty evenly matched.
It's funny how much of a contrast there is between other sports and poker, where like you're not even in poker, you're not even allowed to play until you're 21 in this country or 18 in Europe, and you can't really be like a child prodigy because they just won't let you.
But the thing is, like, there's a bunch from the online era.
Oh, I know that. I just mean like it's an interesting contrast where like you almost have these players who they might be good enough when they're young, that they're like forced to kind of wait until they turn a certain age before they can actually compete, you know. And
it is interesting because like
only get into it as
no
an
other
adult.
no other sport would you only be introduced to in adulthood.
Yeah, right. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, it's like the idea or the notion that the first hand you're ever dealt is like 18 or possibly 21, depending on where you grow up, is very strange. But obviously there are a lot of workarounds. Like even Brian and I were playing in our early teen years. It just wasn't very official. But yeah, it's interesting because obviously the barrier is the gamble.
Yeah.
The fact that you have to wager money. But I would imagine that I wonder if there are regulations against kids underage playing free rolls for real prizes.
Probably. I imagine free rolls count as gambling.
Like stars.net, right, is just free.
I'm pretty sure
Do you think you still have to be 18 or older?
I'm pretty sure whenever
I
you
would
sign
say so.
up, it says 18 or older.
I expect
Yeah,
so,
that's interesting.
I expect it to be like
See, like that to me
box.
is where obviously it becomes like, what the fuck are we doing? You know, we're just like over policing something that there's no risk. There's no risk involved.
I would imagine that in most of the countries where Stars operates, because I know this is relatively true in the UK, they have a lot of regulations about anything that like could be seen as like a pathway to gambling that allows kids. Like there's a lot of talk in the UK and maybe a little bit here as well about video games that have gambling based like transaction things built into them where you can gamble for prizes, because the idea is they're like marketing to teenagers and getting teenagers hooked on that like dopamine kick of gambling.
Here that's like super popular. Like the in-app purchases are one of the biggest markets in like the entire app space. Like things like Candy Crush.
Yeah, I just mean there's probably a lot of people who object to that, and
I object to that more than poker.
In a lot of other
Candy
countries.
Crush?
Essentially,
well, the idea of upselling people once you get them hooked on that dopamine.
right.
fix.
In a lot of other countries, they just have slightly stricter regulations, like based on age, when they think that you're trying to like target young kids or teenagers to get them into something that is gambling based. So I would imagine stars.net, if you're in like the UK, Canada, most of Europe, you probably can't set up an account if you're under 18.
It's very interesting when you look at like the taboos across the world. There isn't very much uniform about policing age restrictions on certain things. Like some countries, drugs are legal no matter what.
It's so varied.
Some alcohol is legal no matter what. But when it comes to gambling, it's like across the world, people feel you need to be an adult, which is really strange. Like imagine whenever you put like drugs, alcohol, sex, violence, owning a gun, all this stuff up for debate. The only thing that the entire world can agree on that you need to be an adult to partake in is gambling.
The way I would see that is that it's because it's the only one that is directly related to money, and I think that I think there's a certain element of like if you introduce kids to gambling, I think every parent is afraid that their kid will gamble away all their money.
There's a certain element of responsibility almost. Like I was reading actually earlier today in Monaco, you can't gamble as a resident. I know that's like the same with other places.
This is true in most.
This is a lot of other places, but like
It's because the local economy can't support it.
yeah, exactly. They also just don't want people to get hurt.
Well, it's not.
Monaco is.
They don't care about individuals. They care about their overall economy collapsing.
Yeah.
Like if a local economy, like let's say a local economy has $1 billion, and you know the casino itself does like I don't know 1.5 billion in revenue just from outside sources, you can assume that some percentage of your local economy, if they were allowed to, would contribute to that. And it's like it's just too much of a dire force on the locals, right? Especially whenever that local economy is being born out of people who like don't have a lot.
Bahamas is like that.
Right. The desire to get lucky and escape is so great that the thought of ruin is not that big of a deal, and it ultimately just collapses the entire economy.
But like where Monaco is, I feel like it is
Monaco is like one of the wealthiest principalities or countries in the world.
Yeah, it's like less than a kilometer long.
So maybe
Monte Carlo is at least. I'm sorry, Monaco's probably a little bit bigger.
Monaco is basically Monte Carlo. Like
It's
Monaco
one
is
of the
only
states
a tiny
that
bit bigger than Monte Carlo. Yeah.
I thought Monte Carlo is one of the states that make up
Monaco is a principality, which is like sort of loosely connected to France. Monte Carlo is the biggest city in Monaco, and there's really not a lot in Monaco outside Monte Carlo.
Gotcha.
It's
Understood.
basically like it's like how the Vatican is within its own
its own-
area, but it's like it's already
Washington,
contained
D.C.
within Rome.
Yeah.
DC might be a good example. Like DC is the city, and theoretically District of Columbia is bigger than that, but really DC is the only thing in there, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
thing.
if the local economy there is like relatively wealthy, there might just be other political reasons. That
I was reading it. It said like I
think that's what Connie's getting at. Like
the prince was like they don't want locals to get hurt.
There's a lot of European countries where they just 100 years ago they decided gambling was bad and they never revisited that idea, and they just still think it's bad for no generic.
But they have no problem with like outsiders coming in and dropping off their money and leaving.
Yeah, it's just you can't look for consistency in
well, everyone wants to be the house.
Right, of course.
Sure.
You know.
This is the thing about European countries. Like they're so happy to be the house, but they're not happy to actually just let people do what they want.
Well, some of like the poorer countries, like Bahamas, like that's how they support the economy.
They'll take the tourism
in
money
general,
because they really need it, but they won't
tourism.
actually allow the locals.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
It's a frustrating reality.
All right, let's talk a little bit. You weren't here yesterday, so we brought it up, but it'll be interesting to bring this discussion back up.
Sure.
WSOP announced that they have a new payout structure for this year.
Dude.
And I gave them a lot of flowers on this one yesterday.
Oh no!
We knew something had to be wrong.
Are we about to take away the flowers?
I'm going to revoke.
Snatch those flowers back.
I'm going to revoke at least some of the flowers.
Right. He gave them a full dozen of roses, and now they get like
That's
three
one-
roses,
taking
one
like
single
rose.
taking like 10
Yes.
of those back. Yeah, okay.
So a lot of what I stated yesterday was predicated on looking at the main event payouts, and they've gotten a lot flatter from like 1 through 100.
That's
which
good.
I think is a huge change. So like finishing 41st now gets you like $250,000, where last year it was like 175K or something like that. So I thought it was like a really big, great sweeping change. But there's a caveat to that. The World Series main event does not pay 2x the minimum, or 2x for a min cash rather. It only pays like 13.5 to min cash.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
It
Wow,
was,
so that's
it was
a
always
1
$15,000.
Wow,
No,
so
they reduced
no.
it.
They've reduced
They've
it.
neutralized the bubble of the main in order to
Correct.
keep money up top and also distribute it.
Correct.
more
Yeah.
evenly at the
Which
end.
I think is very good.
I think that is good.
Yeah.
And I thought that was applying now to all payout structures, but Ella put out a tweet today basically showing a calculated payout table for the millionaire maker, assuming 10,000 entries, which is what they got last year. And looking at the 2023 payout structure compared to the 2024 payout structure, you can see that from top to bottom, you just get less money in all spots, with the exception being the final 5%. So now the only people that are being rewarded from the new payout table is finishing from 15% of the field down to 10% of the field, which to me seems absolutely asinine. It's the exact opposite direction that I think this should be going, because now you create a bigger bubble, which, you know, I was kind of like dismissing this a little bit yesterday when Brewer, or was it Brewer that said,
Nah, Gags.
or Gag said, be ready for like longer bubbles and stuff like that. I was kind of dismissive of it because it was like, well, yeah, but we're exchanging that for like way better payout structures the rest of the way through the tournament payout table. Not true.
Right.
Now you just get an egregiously long bubble for rewarding people who dead min cash.
Yeah.
So
The stalling is going to be
the stalling is going to be
out of control.
next level out of this world. And it doesn't, the only good thing about this is that it's a flat payout from 15% of the field down to 10. That was the only adjustment that they made that they deserve an absolute round of applause for, because it was insane that wasn't the case to begin with.
I need just like lay it out flat. Why is it more stalling?
Because now the bubble, instead of being 1.5 buy-ins, is 2 buy-ins.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you either get 0 or 2 buy-ins, which is now very significant
And
to your ROI.
even weaker players who aren't necessarily stalling deliberately are going to take longer over decisions because the bubble is more meaningful.
They'll just understand if it was a $1,500 buy-in and 10K minimum cash, even the worst player in the field would be hyper focused on the 10K.
I'm just gonna listen to one Dave Matthews song in between actions.
That's pain. That's absolute pain.
Live versions, obviously, like a 15-minute. All right, I check.
So I'm actually like really disappointed that they took the time to examine this and make some good changes without making corrective changes the whole way through.
Yeah, I would love to know what the point of this is. Like, what's this supposed to achieve? Like, to give more payouts to the min cash? Like, what goal does that serve? Like, I'm not
who
sure.
was complaining about this ever? Who was ever upset that finishing, min cashing?
There are wrecks that definitely do. I every year you hear like, I played for X amount of hours and I only made $37, like, because you cash for like just slightly over the buy-in or whatever it is, right? But like, I mean, mainly, I think a lot of them, they were.
It's not slightly over. It was 2,400 to min cash last year.
Yeah, I know, but like, I do hear that like throughout the event.
I guess I just don't think that finishing in the top 15% is the achievement that people want it to be. It's like, yeah, we all want to cash events and it's a notable event when it happens. But like, how much of a reward do you think you deserve for this?
I mean, I think that it should have been like a give and take, right? If you want to pay 2x, then maybe just pay 12.5% or 10,
right?
Or somewhere in between there.
Yeah, but I still think then you have I think the biggest reason to pay 15% is to lighten the load of the bubble.
Right.
Right? Like you get to utilize those extra payout spots to reduce the bubble because now it's less significant. I wouldn't care if they just gave money back. Give like 15, give one buy-in to
20% of the field.
Like, or 17.5%
a lot
of the
people
field,
would
whatever.
hate that though.
Of course they would.
Yes.
Of course, I totally understand.
You can't please everybody at the end of the day, and you're trying to make the experience the best for everyone.
Right, but like you're correcting the wrong part of the payout structure. You're adjusting the incorrect thing. And the reason why it tricked me is because it accidentally addresses some of the issues that we had, which was the big gap between first and second.
Right. Yeah. We had in the main we had this insanely top heavy structure which made no sense. They've corrected that, but the problem was the other events were not that top heavy to begin with. So now what they've done is make them like they're like satellites.
They were still pretty top heavy. There was a 500K difference between first and second in the Millie Maker.
But you see what I mean though, that like they're flattening out the other events and making the bigger min cash was not what we were campaigning for. Like we were not necessarily campaigning that these other events should be, more like a sort of flatter structure.
I think they should be slightly flatter, but I think that money that comes off the top should be distributed to the middle, not the bottom.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, like in this instance, they took 120K off top, which now closed the gap between third and second and first.
Right.
So now the difference between third and second is still 200K, which was what it was last year, but that's a relatively small jump. 800 to 600, not that big. And then now first is a 400K jump, so it's 800 to 1.2 million, where last year was 800 to 1.35, which is very significant. So they basically took 150K and they redistributed it. But my thing is that should be redistributed to the people that are finishing the top 1% of the field.
Yeah, completely agree. I guess that's what I was sort of trying to sort of convey is that we weren't arguing for a redistribution down to the lowest finishes.
Right.
Like that is not what anybody wants because of what the effect is that it has, or I don't want to say it's not what anybody wants, but like it has an effect on the bubble that is already, it's going to exacerbate.
It's excruciating.
It's going to exacerbate the problems you already have. Like
exactly.
You already are not implementing a shot clock, which everybody wants around the bubble.
Right.
You're incentivizing stalling, and now you're making a change that's going to incentivize that even further, and it's going to be a complete mess.
Yeah, and the thing is that or not the thing, but the problem of this is, I think anyway, is that the people who are in charge of making these changes aren't boots on the ground. They're not there during a 15 table bubble where there's, a few dozen diligent players that cannot fucking tolerate having their ROI stolen because somebody else is like anybody who's in the top 10 in chips should be hyper vigilant about having a floor person at their table, just clocking everybody, every decision. More than 10 seconds clock. You know what I mean? Because it needs to be clearly stated that this is not meant to be Robin Hood Men in Tights, where we're just happy to redistribute riches to the poor.
What a fucking great movie that is. My God.
When you you have a floor person there, so they clock them and give them like 5 seconds?
No, that's the problem. That's why I was so irate.
No. I'm saying that's what you want them to do.
Yes.
Right? You clock 5 seconds, you're done.
Yeah, like
right? Because if you clock them for 30 seconds, what the hell's the difference?
Of course, like we don't have the ability to have time banks, at least not as is, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a floor person and you're watching somebody, take egregious liberties with the structure, and you've had them have the clock called on them time and time again, then their hand just becomes dead. Like you just stand there and you eagle eye them, and after 10 seconds, you say you have 2 seconds to act on your hand or it's dead. And you keep reducing that time. Savage is really great about this. But to be fair, the events that Savage floors over tend to be very controllable. I remember I had a big problem with Young Man in the LAPC. This must have been 2017. I was like chip leader in my team.
Young Man.
Young Man's the guy that Young Man's the guy that tried to rob him in Texas.
He also angled me really bad in a 2-5 meetup game in Texas. Told him to go fuck himself.
It was so good.
He's like
He calls everybody Young Man.
he's just a legendary angler. He made a bet. Must have been like 2013. I think it was like a 50K bet that he could walk. Man, I don't remember how many miles it was, but basically he walked for 24 hours around the Commerce Casino. Not indoors, outdoors, like outside of Commerce, in order to win this 50K bet. I think it was like 50 miles or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, he's just like a notorious angler. And he's obviously short on the bubble, and I'm chip leading. And he's just stalling every decision. Like, so I just have Savage come over and just like stand over his shoulder and make him act. And Savage was great about it. But again, the bubble of LAPC at that time was like, like 42 people cashed. So you're looking at like 4 tables, 5 tables. It's pretty easy for one person to manage. Right. When you're in these WSOP events and it's like a 1,000 person bubble,
right,
where there's like 11 tables, and honestly, like those ones are the least frustrating.
They are, because they also don't last that long, right?
Exactly.
Because it's just like 1,000 people or 10,000, whatever, how many 1,000 people left, someone's gonna bust.
Right, but like the 10K 6 max is a really great example of one that is incredibly frustrating. I remember it must have been like 2018 or so.
There's like 4 tables and you're like, fuck.
So I think it was like 2018. The bubble lasted 4.5 hours.
Oh my God.
Because it's a 6 max, so it's super deep. And people who are average stack or below are heavily incentivized to play slowly.
Very incentivized.
Nobody busts.
4.5 hours.
4.5 hours.
Do you realize that means you went to a break in between? Like it's the break, play for 2 hours. Break, play for 2 hours. Jesus
and then
Christ.
The bubble breaks. Yeah. And like, look, part of that is a product of the structure. Part of that is short stack surviving a bunch. I've had LAPC bubbles last an incredibly long time as well.
Does the WSOP use shot clocks for any event at all?
No.
They do for the high rollers.
The high rollers.
For the 100Ks plus,
I was going to say
25Ks.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I was thinking maybe even for maybe they should at least have maybe 10Ks and higher.
Everything that starts in Paris, they should just run with shot clocks because they have the capacity.
There you go. That's good. That's a good measure.
But like for the 25Ks and above, you have a shot clock from hand 1.
You mean the in the back corner?
Yeah, in the purple section.
Yeah, the 5Ks and above.
Do you think there's some, what do you think the resistance is from the organizers with regard to doing shot clocks for events lower than the high rollers?
I would say it's staff and getting everybody to comply with the rule.
Like training the dealers.
Right.
For
The dealers
it.
already the dealers are already inexperienced usually at the World
I could see
Series,
that.
and they're already having a hard enough time just dealing. So having them to now manage a shot clock, having them
shot clocks just don't scale very well. Is also the problem.
Also, it's I think you have a lot of recreational players who've never used one before, and now maybe that takes away from their experience because now they're you know, a lot of people are gonna be complaining like, I've never used a shot clock before.
Well,
Now I have to,
what I will say about that,
my hand got mucked. I had aces. Man.
What I will say about that is they did shot clocks in the WPT Prime that I went deep in 2022, and they introduced it like a couple of levels before the
Right
bubble.
on the bubble, they do it.
Yeah, and I didn't see a single rec player complain or have an issue from the entire time it was introduced.
Yeah,
and that was
of
a
course.
1K.
Right.
So you can do it, but I definitely understand the training of the dealers being an issue.
99% of the time when people use the excuse of Rex won't like it, they're wrong.
Yeah, that's for sure. But something that's been really cool about Triton is they have it like built into the table.
Yeah.
It's so sick. It's like an LED in the middle of the table, like right above where you would put the put the flop right above it, and the dealer has buttons right here just to control it. Like it's so
That's
smart.
the future of live poker.
I don't think that the Rex wouldn't like it. I just think that they
understand.
think that might be the case.
I just think operators tend to be very far off what people actually want, and I think that this payout structure is reflective of that. The untrained dealer thing, like, that's a very fair reason to not do it. Like, when I went to Bally's restart at Commerce, they had dealers in there that clearly have never dealt anything regarding shot clock or TV or anything along those lines. I mean, honestly, it seemed like it was their first day dealing, to be quite frank.
What's my bet?
And after like an hour, I was like, we have to get rid of the shot clocks. Like, it's just absolutely unfair to utilize them because the dealers are like choosing at random when to remember to put someone on the clock.
There were times in WPT as well, even in the 10K actually last year, where I had dealers that actually needed to be corrected about what the rule was about the shot clock. Like I had a dealer that was slightly wrong about how much time a player gets pre-flop before the shot clock is activated or before a time bank is used. And we had to like call the floor and ask the floor to clarify to the dealer it's actually 30 seconds, not 15 or something like that, because a player got like time banked at a time when they shouldn't have gotten time banked. So they lost the time bank because the dealer was wrong about how much time they're supposed to be allowed. So that does happen. It's definitely a concern.
Yeah. I mean, you know, whatever. These are small gripes. We're coming into the series. It's going to be a big, fun summer, but we'll forever be talking about these payouts whenever they are just so...
egregious, to use your favorite word.
Yeah, but the thing is like, I don't understand why, right? It's like...
That's what I don't get. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, maybe
I don't understand having 12 million up top in the main event and 6 million to second. I get what they were doing. They want to break the Jamie Gold thing, right? But like, it's literally just optics and no one fucking cares except for the person who made that decision. But the people who do care are the people that are actually out there playing, having to figure out a way to navigate the variance of a card game while gambling for $6 million in a heads-up scenario where chops are not facilitated.
Yeah.
It's just like it's beyond insane. And like the thing is, in the past, payout structures could be kind of mediated based off of the ability to chop, and you saw it a lot. Like you'd see 9-way chops, 12-way chops, 16-way chops, right? And like in those instances, you're just flattening whatever it was that the operator created. But that's just not really feasible, especially at the World Series.
Like to play a little bit of a devil's advocate, specifically for the main event, it might just be okay. Like this is like
why?
Because it's only going to affect a couple people, and it's just like it's the World Series. It's the biggest thing ever. Maybe they should be, having the sweat dripping down their face and playing for this ridiculous amount of money and can't chop because it's the main event. This is what you signed up for. This is the biggest thing in poker. Let's make it the craziest thing.
Oh, let's make it winner take all.
Let's make it winner take all.
I think they should have a winner take all bracelet event.
That would be fun.
I think that's something they genuinely should do.
Yeah,
I don't think they'd get many runners for that.
But 1K. Yeah. Winner take all 1K.
If they did a winner take all like 300, it would be a fucking huge. I think.
That's maybe even lower than a 1K.
I think that's the price. I mean, think about how much money goes up. You don't need to.
Think about how many people would punt because they don't understand that you can't just jam everything just because it's winner take all. Like they're going to go wider than Chippy V in spots where they would usually go tighter.
Don't get us started.
Hold on. Let's do a 300 super duper hyper turbo.
Winner take all. Yeah, there we go.
3-minute levels.
One hand levels.
Yeah.
One hand. Every table plays
3-minute
hand
levels
for hand for hand tournament. Play one hand, bust a bunch of people, play the next hand, etc.
It would be fucking great. We all start with like, I don't know.
10 bigs.
I don't think it would get that big.
I don't think it would either.
And it's based off of just like the flip and goes. Flip and goes are effectively like random chance winner take all, and they barely are able to even field the event. And it's always the toughest event. It's like 120 of the sickest pros out there that were willing to fire a dozen bullets. But yeah, I mean, like, look, I understand what you're saying about the main event, but it's like, okay, if you're gonna bring in a much larger audience on average by increasing the amount that they're playing for up top, then okay, sure, I can get behind that. But I don't think the numbers at all show that to be true. Yeah. Do you think this World Series main event was watched more than the Jamie Gold World Series main event?
Well, I mean, obviously not. The Jamie Gold one was on ESPN. And this one was.
And this one was on at 1 a.m. on fucking CBS Sports Net.
or behind a paywall. So
right.
Like, yeah.
And that's my point, right? It's like, do you even think it was watched more than whoever won the main event 6 years ago?
No, probably not.
Right. This is what I'm getting at. It's like, so who's actually benefiting from these egregious, and it doesn't just affect a couple people. Like, sure, that's easy to silo it off and say like, oh, the only people that are being affected are the people playing for it, but that's not true. There's a massive trickle down effect when it comes to the poker community. Like, the guys that do well in the main event often spread that money around, whether it's by playing other events,
staking
playing
people,
cash, putting together stables, firing off in other regards. Like, the more that you distribute that wealth throughout the top 100 players, and I think this is true for growth and sustainability too. Finishing in the top 100 should be enough money to begin a poker career, right? That's the dream that you're selling, is if you finish in the top 1% of the main event, you could have your first step into being a professional poker player.
Well, I mean, that is the case now, right?
It will be for this year.
Yeah.
Right. So I for what it's worth, huge kudos to what they're doing to the main event this year as far as payout structure goes. If it's the exact same prize pool as last year, it's 10 million to first instead of 12. They took a lot more money off the top, and they're smashing all of that money into the top 1%.
It's still 4 million they're playing for, so it's still a lot.
It's still a lot, yes.
Still a lot, but they get to take like essentially 2 million off the top and spread it out.
Right, and even still, I would still advocate for taking more off the top. I would like to see it be 8 million up top, 6 million to second.
Matt, what does 100th play?
100th pays 100K on the dot.
You know what you could do is you could almost have a system where you keep it at like, you keep the final table payouts the same, like 10 million, 7.5, 5, something like that, whatever. And then every year, if the main event gets bigger, whatever money it gets bigger by, all of that is just redistributed to the other positions.
We said that last year, and I think that it's a good idea. Like, I just genuinely do. I think it's like a really good idea in general to, $10 million. We don't ever, like, look, if we get to a point where the main event is so big that it could be 100 million up top, okay, that might be something to strive for. But the difference between like 10 million, 12 million, 15 million, 16 million, it's totally irrelevant.
Right.
It's
the next milestone is like 20 million. Like,
right.
If we ever get to a point where it might be, instead of being 18 million, it might be 20 million, then yeah, maybe it starts to matter. But it just doesn't matter 10 versus 12.
It's kind of funny because they back in the day, they used to do that. It used to be $1 million to first. Like, every year it was just 1 million to first. You knew that, like, when you go play the main event, it's gonna be $1 million to first, and that's how you become a millionaire playing poker. And then it didn't matter how many they got. And then eventually it started to pick up, in the late
I think it was
the late 90s, the early 2000s.
It was either Varconi's year or Moneymaker year.
I think Varconi's year it was more than $1 million. It was like
2 maybe.
Yeah, maybe 2 or maybe 1.9 or something like that. And then,
the following year, Moneymaker's year was like 8x.
Yeah, it was 2.5.
The prize pool, or whatever.
And his was 2.5 million to first. So like eventually they got so many people in the event that they had to like increase it, which is like, okay, yeah, you get 20,000 people in it. Okay, then we can bump it up to like whatever, 12 or 15 million, but just keep it flat.
It's just weird to me, like if you're assigned with this job, like you have 11 months every year to kind of correct course and listen to what people want and think about the economics of it all and how this will help distribute things and grow the brand and stuff like that. It's just crazy to me that we're so far apart, that the community at large is so far apart away from the operators. And you would think that there's like some very clear underlying reason behind that we just seemingly can't identify. Very strange.
Yeah,
right?
It would just really be nice to know like what the point of this is. Like what's the logic, what's the goal, like where's the transparency of like what you're trying to achieve by making these changes.
Yeah.
I think like the sole goal should be making sure that at the bare minimum 100 people's lives change or not change, but
that
potentially.
That's the point that I'm trying to make is that the more people that you can touch on giving them quote unquote life-changing money, and like we can debate all day what determines life-changing money.
Yeah.
But like 100K is a pretty nice barometer.
Six figures for top 100, I think, is really good.
It's a chunk.
Yeah. And this is, Conrad finished 112th or something like that?
Something along those lines.
Got 50K.
Yeah, something like, it might have been like 130. I don't know. It's between 110 and 130th.
Right.
I think.
Right. And like that was worth 50K in the past, which is just like, okay.
Wow.
Like,
what
cares?
are we doing here?
Yeah. I was like, wait, what is this?
And
This
what
the
would it
main
be worth
event?
now?
Without looking, I would guess like somewhere between 75 and 80.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's all interesting. Obviously these are just, small kinks that we always discuss and will continue to be brought up. Same as like the online structures where in some events it's really flat, in other events it's like 3x first then second place.
I was going to reply with online. What online?
Well,
we don't have a clue what online is going on this year.
That's true.
It's coming. Listen, like I said yesterday on the pod, it's good that we're waiting for it because that means we're going to get the new stuff.
Well,
hopefully.
It does seem that they're dedicated to only rolling it out if we get the new software, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Because, like, honestly, they could have said, fuck it by now. They could have said, fuck it, let's use your dog shit software that you have now and just run that shit.
You want to know what the biggest change for them will be? Well, not the biggest change, but the biggest pain point that they've had in the past that will be corrected. No PLO mobile.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
So all those PLO bracelets will now be able to be played on mobile.
That's super cool. Like, I mean, they have
PLO
so
Boom is
much
coming.
stuff coming, like the mystery bounties, the fucking fact that you can register after you bust the goddamn tournament.
Oh, yeah, that's actually a great point.
Are you kidding me?
So you can now fire from the beginning, and if you bust, you can re-register at max late reg.
Oh, that's
like,
nice.
imagine them not wanting to wait. It's like, of course, like this is a hassle. This is horrible.
Yeah.
You don't have to make your decision. Like you get like 15 seconds to make your decision.
I
before
can't
want
tell
to
you
re-enter.
how many times I've busted a tournament and then I'm like, fuck, I'm going to rebuy. Fuck, I don't have enough. Can I do it in 30 seconds? I have to reload in 30 seconds. Can it happen? And it's like, you sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But it's really silly. And I can't wait till we get new software. I think it's coming.
That's true.
Man, it's going to be weird. All the structures are going to change. The hack in the past was if you just max late regged all the big buy-in stuff, you just got free EV.
Yeah. Because
you'd get in with, 10 big blinds. Chip leader would have like 8 starting stacks and 60% of the field was gone. 70% of the field was gone.
Something crazy.
So like if you doubled, you cashed and suddenly like you're just playing for a lot of money, only having put in like 30 minutes of playtime.
Yeah.
Cashing 40% of tournaments, here we come.
No, all that's going to change now.
Yeah.
All the structures are very likely to adjust.
Here we come in the past.
Oh, yeah, sure. All right, let's get a little bit into the strat chat that we had planned out. You recently released a new course.
I did.
Called Theory in the Chaos. The idea behind this course is taking a look at Rocket Solver and utilizing it to examine multi-way spots beyond three-way. So in the past, we've had simple three-way and some other tools that are out on the market which allow for you to utilize multi-way dynamics. Rocket Solver basically builds upon that and allows you to start examining 4-way, 5-way, 6-way. You can do pre-flop, you can do bomb pots, everything up to a full 9-handed ring game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, it's a pretty big game changer if you have a powerful enough computer to handle certain things. But what you pretty quickly find, or what I found during making the series, is you you have to manage the game trees that you're using, because those game trees, if you're trying to do bomb pots, and if you're trying to do, 5, 6, 7 players or something like that, they get really big really quickly. So I'm looking into getting like a server to run a bunch of stuff on. And it's just because even the 64 gigs of RAM that I have is not necessarily enough to run the size of tree that you would need to actually run like a 9-way bomb pot. So it's pretty crazy.
Okay, so I guess before we kind of get into the mechanics of the actual course itself, what were some of the like brief oversights that you've kind of like were able to pluck out as you were able to, run these? Because like, look, this is just going to be a cursory overview. The solver is young enough where obviously we're not going to be drilling down into the nuance, but you're going to be able to pull away some very simple tactics and principles, I think, from what you see in your preliminary solves.
Yeah, I think one thing that really stood out to me that was really interesting was that the ranges that you're actually up against and the bet sizings that you're facing matter a lot more than the positional configurations, because there were a couple of times in the course where I took a certain sim and then like switched the positions around, and it didn't actually alter the strategies as much as you might expect. So, you're facing a bet as the second to act, and you have 2 players in the blinds who've already checked compared to having 2 players behind you who are left to act. It's obviously going to slightly alter the strategy of the first player who's betting, but when you're facing the bet, the size of the bet and the ranges that you're actually up against matter more than the fact that there's 2 players behind compared to 2 players in front. That was something that I observed that was really interesting. And it does kind of illustrate that when you're in environments where players' ranges are really wide, again, as we saw in the course when in episode 3, I go through a lot of spots with players that have like crazy wide ranges. If the ranges are super wide, there's more aggression than you might think simply because those ranges are so weak. What you're seeing here is something that I kind of came up with to sort of deal with that a little bit, which is this idea of a methodology to basically just figure out which player has the strongest range, which player has the second strongest, which player has the third. And if everybody beyond the first and second player has a really weak range, then everybody is sort of collectively in third place. And that was, I think, an impactful thing as well, because it helped to sort of categorize different formations where you have the blinds are both in the pot and they have very wide ranges, and then you've got an in-position caller and a pre-flop raiser who's in the middle. Then you've got formations where pre-flop raiser is like under the gun and there's 2 or 3 in-position callers and pre-flop raiser is first to act. You've got a whole host of other configurations that can exist. So I tried to kind of categorize those and look at what the impacts were of how many ranges we're up against, what sort of actual ranges we do see, and then what kinds of strategies can actually be implemented when we're in these environments with super wide ranges. So that was basically the first 3 episodes. And then episodes 4 through 7, we're really taking through the process of building out strategies in one specific kind of scenario and doing a very narrow dive into that spot. And when those episodes come out in the next week or 2, you guys are going to get the chance to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I did a multi-way course a couple of years ago, and obviously I was just flying off of intuition, didn't really have much in the way of multi-way solves to look at, but I did a similar thing with the ranges where I just always labeled the pre-flop raiser as range A.
Yeah.
And then we went through different formations based off of where the calling formations came from. So there was the ABC formation, which would be 2 in-position callers, and the original raiser would then be first to act. There would be the BAC formation where you're basically monkey in the middle as the pre-flop aggressor. So you're going to have like a big blind defend and maybe a button call.
And then Stakes Bible you're talking about?
I might have revisited it there.
Did in there,
yeah.
Sure.
I did
feel like this was further ago, though.
Yeah, I did a multi-way webinar maybe 2 or 3 years ago that I repackaged that or repurposed that idea.
I think
from.
it was longer than that. I think
it might have been.
I think it was probably like 6 years ago. I think time goes way quicker than
we
think.
You forget about the COVID years.
Because I've put courses out on the site that I'm like, oh yeah, I made this course a couple of years ago, and I look at it and it's like 2018. I'm like, wow, that's 6 years ago.
When you say a couple years, you have to add the COVID years.
Yeah,
right?
precisely.
So it's always 2 or 3 more years later.
Like the first course.
There's a 4-year Bermuda Triangle of COVID that didn't exist.
Exactly. The first course that I put out on the site where I had all these ideas about tournaments and the 6 stages of tournaments and stuff. I look back at that sometimes like that was 2018. Like we didn't have any pre-flop solves and shit like that. Like we didn't have so many things. So it's wild to see the time that goes by and how much evolution there is in strategies.
Yeah, whenever you were coming up with the pre-flop ranges for these situations, were you basically just like painting these ranges, or was there something that you were able to kind of lean on?
With the ranges that were deliberately designed to be excessively wide, I was painting them in. So with those ones, I was just picking, ranges that were maybe representative of super passive players that are not following any kind of optimal strategy. They're just kind of, flicking it in with a high frequency, because that was deliberately designed to see, like, if we have a strong, tight range and everybody else is super wide, what happens?
Right.
But parts 4 through 7, we're looking at basically a 4-way spot. It's drawn from MTT ranges because they're a little bit wider, but it's 100 big blinds where it's early position open, cutoff call, small blind and big blind both overcall, and everybody has an equilibrium range that's pulled from GTO Wizard. So that is our sort of blueprint scenario for looking at a situation where, based on players having reasonable ranges for a multi-way pot, what does a 4-way pot really look like? And then from there, I sort of extrapolated by adding in another, excessively wide range to make it 5-handed and things like that. Because part of the problem is, if you look at sims, there are no, optimal 5-way ranges, because most sims that you'll find don't allow 5 players to go to a flop because of how rarely it happens to begin with, and because of the complexity that it adds to the tree. So most of the time, after there's already a raise and 2 calls, the only player who's allowed to call again is the big blind. So you won't get like hijack, cutoff, button, small blind, big blind going 5 ways to a flop with optimal ranges. So you do have to paint a little bit, but I tried to kind of bridge the gap by having limited amounts of painted ranges in the second part and using some equilibrium ranges. Was
there any one particular mechanic or principle that jumped out at you that you were able to discover running these spots?
I think that the 1, 2, 3 method that I kind of hit on there is definitely one of them, but I think that in terms of actual strategic stuff, it definitely struck me that we have a lot of hands that bet flop multi-way with the intent to change what they're going to do depending on what actually happens after we bet. So this is what I did in the course was I compared it to the concept of in like no limit single draw, you have hands that are like a convertible hand, right? So you have like a jack, like if you have like jack 7, 4, 3 deuce or something in single draw, that has showdown value. But if something happens that causes you to need to break it and draw to a 7, you can do that. So they call those convertible hands. In multi-way spots, there are quite a lot of spots where we'll bet like middle pair with a backdoor, and then if the in-position player or if one of the tighter ranges calls us, then that hand will turn into a bluff on a lot of turns and just try to exert fold equity and have block us to 2 pair and stuff like that. But if like the big blind calls, with a calling with a wider range, now we have showdown value, and so on a lot of turns we're actually going to check back. So this was a really interesting thing that started to emerge, and it's certainly, I think, not that intuitive because it feels weird to have middle pair 4 ways and just be like, oh, this is a clear bet. But it was definitely pretty consistent how often I saw these types of things happening, especially in instances where you have something like middle pair with a backdoor, but you have a bad kicker, and all the other players are in a position where when you bet, if they have like middle pair with a better kicker but no backdoor, they have to fold it. Now you have this really beneficial situation of you get to bet middle pair and get a better middle pair to fold, and then if you don't get a fold, you still have the backdoor. So there's a lot of merging and a lot of strange kind of betting decisions there that seem to make no sense and seem to be just for coverage or something like that, but actually it's because they need this kind of utility and they need to have a different option depending on which player actually continues. That was definitely interesting.
Yeah, that really hits home to me. It basically encapsulates a lot of my bomb pot strategy that is very intuitive to me in the sense that what I recognize most people fail at in bomb pots is that they're too unwilling to bet themselves. They're so afraid of being trapped and check raised and facing multi-streets of regression, et cetera, that they don't understand the priority in multi-way pots is to become the uncapped range.
Yes.
And the easiest way to become the uncapped range is to put in some sort of aggressive action. Now, alternatively, you could obviously check raise, but in order to check raise, that's much more expensive, and you have to be much more precise about how you carve out that range.
And you also have to face a bet in the first place, which doesn't always happen.
Also true.
Yeah.
So when I approach bomb pots, I basically just look to bet very, very, very small with any hand that has a reasonable amount of equity. And I get made fun of a lot by the players that I'm playing with because they think it's so ridiculous to see me show up on the river with like bottom pair turned into bottom trips when I was betting 3 streets. But it's exactly that concept that you're speaking of. The reason why you bet bottom pair to begin with is because, number one, it blocks sets, which is helpful in a regard of bluffing. Number two, it can improve to bottom trips or 2 pair, which is helpful in regard to value. So in both of these aspects, it's about equity realization. So basically just bottom pair has some equity.
Yeah.
And it's about that, right? And then you get to carve out how you strategically utilize your bottom pair hand class based off of the properties of its sidecar. So if it's bottom pair that's 3 to a straight or bottom pair that's 3 to a flush, that's going to come in handy on texture changes. If it's bottom pair disconnect, like maybe ace deuce on a jack 7-2 board, well, now that's going to come in handy more so for like showdown value and the ability to improve, or maybe the ability to, potentially bluff if a very specific run out comes, like Broadway, or low, something like that. Like now maybe this hand is useful in a bluffing way. But the point is that it's not that critical on flops to bucket your hand in some sort of class as far as where it ranks, because it's not a heads up pot. In a heads up pot, we can look at middle pair and we can estimate the equity that it has against a range, right? So we can look at middle pair on any texture versus one single range and say, okay, this hand has about 52% equity versus range, because that's roughly what this hand class will possess. But when you're against like 8 ranges, you have no idea.
Right.
You could have near 0. You could have maybe like near 30%. It just all depends on the distribution of those hands.
And it's also like, it's another aspect of it is that multi-way, there's a lot of different ways to have a certain amount of equity. Like a heads up, there's only really a couple of different types of ways that you can arrive at a flop and only have something like 30% equity. Usually it's going to be like you have an underpair, you have like ace high with an undercard, stuff like that. There's a lot of spots where it's kind of hard to have 30% equity heads up. Multi-way, there are, depending on the number of players, especially if you look at like lower amounts of equity, like 15% equity, there might be a ton of different ways to have 15% equity.
Right.
You could have like the nut backdoor and bottom pair or something might have 15% equity, even 5 or 6 ways. Whereas, having like a random gut shot and an overcard could also have 15% equity. Having middle pair could have 15% equity.
Even having like top pair with like a really dirty kicker.
Yeah, or no backdoor, dirty kicker. Like that could have, like there's a million different ways to have 15% equity, and playability over the later streets and the extent to which your hand can improve to make very strong hands as opposed to kind of strong hands. All of that stuff makes a ton of difference in multi-way spots. And I definitely saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of spots where a hand that didn't have much ability to improve would fold the flop even to a relatively small bet. I think I looked at like a monotone board, like a jack 6 deuce monotone, where preflop raiser was betting 10%, and a lot of like pair with no flush card hands were just folding to 10%. And it was because you just can't realize equity. Like you might have 25%, but when you don't have the flush card, a quarter of the turns you're stone dead. And then even when you're not, like you're up against a range that has enough flushes in it that you're dead against those specific hands. So like it becomes really interesting when you start to see these specific types of board textures, and this is part of why you see some super tiny bets on these boards in multi-way pots. But by contrast, you also see some really interesting spots where actually larger bet sizes do get used occasionally. I ran a spot for like the classic sort of ace king 8 rainbow where heads up, like preflop raiser is going to get to be very polar, and they were betting like 90% pot at a decent frequency there into 3 players, just because you can have 2 pair plus and they can't have much of it. So it's interesting how some of the principles do still very much apply, but then a lot of them are really flipped on their head.
Yeah, it probably becomes even more less likely that like the 3rd or 4th player is going to have those stronger hands. Like where your heads up, maybe they did decide to flat you with like aces or kings or ace king in certain situations. But like now when there's 3-4 people, that like those, the people at the back end of the calling, they they just never have ace
yeah,
king.
and you get
top
like
of range. Really,
the ace king 8 that I looked at. What you also got was like this phenomenon where, because maybe none of them can have aces or kings or ace king, when you're up against 3 opponents and the top of their range is like ace 8, king 8, or pocket 8s, if you have like an 8, it was like pure bluff every time.
Yeah.
It was like every hand with an 8 was like just blast off.
Right, now you just block all
Exactly,
their value.
because every time you have bottom pair, you block almost all their value from almost all the opponents. So it was like you're very polar, where you're not even bluffing a lot of your straight draws. You're just taking an 8 and you're just firing it off, because how could they possibly have enough to call with? It's definitely really interesting.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Along those lines, were there any like textures or specific formations where the callers actually became the advantageous range?
Yes, that's definitely the case, except it really just depends on the first caller, because the first caller is always going to have the narrowest range, and so it's going to be the boards that specifically smash that range really hard. The only spots where the board textures did allow the wider ranges to actually have a little bit of an advantage to some degree were the boards where there's some region of hands that they can have that none of the other players can, or that the first 2 players can't. So it would be, in particular, the low connected boards, like the low straights where the big blind and small blind can have a lot of sets, 2 pairs, things like that. And also some of the low paired boards. Like I ran a spot for like a 6-6 deuce rainbow, and the big blind was like donking out for quarter pot like 20% of the time, because the big blind can have a 6 so much easier than anybody else can. And you get, and the added factor of that is like when the big blind donks on that board, the original pre-flop raiser, they had 0 raises. Like they just can't raise.
Right.
Because in that formation, they just almost never have a 6, and they're up against a range that contains a 6 enough that they just have to play call or fold, especially when there's 2 players behind. So that was definitely something that did come up. Board texture was very sensitive.
Was donking another principle or mechanic, I guess, that we saw getting executed a lot more? Because I know when I spoke about like the different formation types, a lot of it was predicated on, well, in certain formations, as the big blind defender, we're going to get to put the pre-flop aggressor in a tough spot by leading.
It's really only true on those boards that I just mentioned. And the reason is simply that in the formation that I was looking at, and in a lot of others, when you're the last pre-flop caller, for example, in the big blind, you're not going to have a range that's very heavy on board coverage, because so many of your high card hands want to just squeeze when there's 2 ranges in the pot. So you're going to have a very low card dense range. And that means the boards with a lot of low cards on them, like the connected ones, the low paired ones, they're really good for you. So you do get to lead a bit on those. But on every other texture, you're just devoid of really strong stuff. So you just can't lead. And then when you're in the small blind, you actually have a range that has a lot more coverage in it, because you're not necessarily just flicking it in, closing the action with quite so many weak low card hands, right? So because you have a range that has more coverage, there's no specific board on which you're super weak, but there's very few boards on which you're actually really strong. And I did see bits and pieces of leading. Like I saw a couple of like weird things where small blind would donk like 8% of the time on a weird board like ace 7 4 2 spades, because they have all the 2 pairs and both the sets. But there was never a board that I found that was able to find that the small blind was donking like any substantial frequency where it's like a big part of strategy.
Right.
It was always just mixing in like a low frequency. But with the big blind, because of that density to the low cards, there were definitely some boards where it was like, oh, this is a very good leading board for the big blind. So yeah, a couple of nuances there depending on exactly which range we're talking about.
Sounds fun. It sounds like a course that is pretty heavy in discovery, which personally, like I'm excited for. It's nice that we're kind of embracing the full circle nature of theory and poker strategy as a whole, where you know, it started with intuition, it moved into machines, and now I think we're kind of getting to a point where we're marrying the two together, at least for all the heads up scenarios, but we can't just ignore the way that live actually plays. You know, I've played a handful of tournaments this year, and I played a handful last year, and the thing that you very quickly realize is that if the buy-in is below 5K, you are playing a shitload of multi-way pots. And very quickly, like, a lot of your rudimentary study kind of goes out the window. Now, your ability to freestyle in real time and use those principles to your favor obviously are incredibly helpful. But I think that a course like this starts to give you a little bit more confidence in that ability to freestyle, gives you a little bit more oversight of what theory kind of looks like at a global level. Again, maybe we're not to the point yet where we're really able to say anything with the utmost confidence that, for sure, in these formations, we get to do X, Y, and Z, like kind of the way that we discovered the big bets on the ace, king, fives and stuff like that. Yeah. That stuff will come to fruition throughout the course of years as we're able to run more. But currently we're just at the stage now where it's like, well, we can play bomb pots a hell of a lot better.
Yeah. And with that in mind, the reason I titled the course the way I did, the reason I called it Theory and the Chaos, is to really to hit home to people out there in some way that poker theory is still poker theory. And that poker theory isn't about learning how to play a certain board and then as soon as you go multi-way, it doesn't apply anymore, right? Poker theory is about understanding the elements that contribute to a well-rounded strategy in a given spot. And it doesn't matter how many players are in the pot. It doesn't matter if there's 9 players. It doesn't matter if there's 15 players in the pot. You can still figure out a strategy that makes sense according to theory. And that's what the whole point of this course is. It's to highlight the idea that there is no environment in which theory is somehow not applicable anymore.
Right. All right. If you guys are interested in checking this course out, be sure to head to solvefory.io. You can hit hashtag S4Y in the chat to get that link. If you are not a member yet and you'd like to sign up and check out this course, we're currently running a half off special. Just use promo code CHAOS at sign up and you'll get your first month half off. It's a good one. We're going to have the second part of that course coming out in the next week or so. So we'll have Hunt back on again to discuss the latter half of that course, as well as, all things WSOP.
All his deep runs, all his final tables.
That's right.
I mean, hopefully by this time next week, I'll already be in day 2 of the 5K.
There we go.
The 5K on Tuesday, so hopefully I'm not available next Wednesday.
Wait, it's on Tuesday?
5K's on Tuesday, yeah.
I thought it started Wednesday for some reason.
No, that's Landon's final table on Wednesday.
Interesting. Okay.
Can we get some clarification on that? Does anybody know what is this other room that we'll be in?
It's not another room. It's the audience. It's like
somebody said something about another room in the chat.
I heard another room.
No. I wrote it and I corrected it.
Oh, okay.
You guys only read
it was Conrad with misinformation.
There's like a spot where you.
It's like the main event. There's a stage that will have seating on it, and then there will be an audience.
Right.
Conrad's gonna get community noted soon. He's spreading misinformation.
I might end up.
It's not my problem. These idiots don't read further.
Listen, I might end up on the table, so who knows?
If Landon wins, you mean?
What are you talking about?
Drunk LeMan is
in
coming
no capacity are you going to be on the table?
You never
under
know.
the table.
You never under the table, on the table.
They're playing for serious money.
Nah.
Put your dick
peanuts
away.
to LeMana.
Have you seen me at the World Series main event?
Have you seen Drift recently?
They're playing for $6 million. Heads up.
Honestly, part of why I'm excited to be there is just to see what LeMan is like as a railbird at a major final table like that.
I'll be fine.
He's drunk and blacked out and loud.
Well, I haven't known him for long enough to have seen him do that, so it's going to be fun. You guys have all that memory of what was it? Which year was it? Like 2012 or something that you guys were railing somebody, or 2011? Phil Collins. Yeah.
Yep.
I saw you on Poker Go watching it recently. It was really funny.
Yep. Those were the glory days. Glad that's behind us.
I can feel it coming in the air tonight.
All right. That's going to do it for us today. We're going to be off the next 2 days since we're running the Cash Academy here in Vegas. We'll be back next Monday at noon Pacific. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Next week will be our last week of noon. And then we'll switch to the new time for WSOP, which will be 10 a.m. every morning. We may actually end up switching early next week. We'll see.
We switch probably Tuesday.
Well, I don't know. It'll depend on how the cash games work out. But yeah, maybe we switch to early next week. We'll see. We'll talk about it this weekend. Anyway, thank you guys, as always, for supporting us, rocking with us this week. We'll be back next week. Be sure to stay tuned to our socials at solve4y_pod. For all start times, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you guys all next week.
Peace.
Peace.